and welcome to our Midweek podcast. Me and Winston sit down together and we chat about the themes and questions that came up during the sermon. And today's week is on Barabbas and Jesus' mock trial.
So the two of them are very, very interesting, and as you probably might have heard from the sermon, or remember that they both have the same name.
Yeah.
So they're very interesting. They kind of represent two different ways in which people had a view of how God saves. It's very, very... I found it, even in preparing it, just a very, very thought-provoking passage, this little cameo that's sort of stuck in there, but is absolutely central to the kingdom message that Jesus is bringing in.
Now, you started the service off revealing that you have a background in marketing.
Not so much a background in marketing. I mean, I wasn't on the marketing team, but I worked for consumer goods, global brands as they're called today. So certainly had the opportunity of working with some excellent marketers. In actual fact, the CEO of the company that I worked for, or the brand that I worked for in South Africa, was actually voted as the country's best marketer by the prestigious Sunday Times Marketing Award, which is the most prestigious marketing award back home. So got to work with some really, really cool, talented people, and working in HR, that was pretty neat. Put a bit of that to practice, and if I can sort of just brag a little bit, is that okay?
This is perfectly
acceptable. Is that perfectly okay? We ran a really neat ad campaign, a recruitment ad campaign one year, and the agency that helped us on the ad campaign, I didn't know this, actually submitted it for the Sunday Times Marketing Awards, and we won. We got the best recruitment ad campaign for that particular year, the award for that one. So I've got a soft spot for marketing. I really, really enjoy marketing.
There are some people that don't have a soft spot for marketing. What would you say to maybe encourage people that marketing is actually something that's important and can be very good?
Yeah. I think we tend to associate marketing very quickly with just a consumer culture, and so there is maybe that negative association. But marketing is so effective because it works. And I think the reason that marketing works is very, very early on, marketers figured out that if you want to get a message across, reaching people's hearts is actually even more important than reaching their minds. If a message doesn't connect with people's hearts, it can be factually true, it can be important, but it won't necessarily move people.
Yeah.
But if you can somehow tie that message to an experience, to an emotion, to a memory, or to something that just elicits a response or empathy in people, you've got them.
Yeah.
And I think there's something which the church can learn from that as well.
I think so too. I had a cousin who wrote a paper on commercials.
Yeah.
And the question was, do commercials influence you? Mm-hmm. And so he wrote this paper. It was a long paper explaining how he connected with this commercial. He thought it was great. But at the end of it, he said, but this didn't influence me. It's like, but it did.
But it did.
Your whole paper points towards that it did influence you, even if you don't buy their product.
And that's the thing. Even if you don't make the purchase, it's left an imprint on you. And who knows how it might affect a later purchase, maybe not even of that particular product, but something in that category as well.
And it gives you the options, right? I think that people don't realize that there's actually a whole bunch of companies out there that are completely invisible to you because they don't have the marketing that they need in order to make an impact. And that affects your choices.
Exactly. And I know that's probably something which some churches would feel very, very uncomfortable about. Again, it feels like you are sort of overly promoting.
Yeah.
But if you have that view, it's really just about putting it out there so that people at least know that you're on the map. So you have that opportunity to make an informed choice, which is ultimately, I suppose, what marketing is wanting to do, is help you to make an informed choice, even if they're putting a little bit of spin on their particular product, maybe being a little bit better than the other side. But it is about giving people choice.
Yeah, you look at a toothpaste commercial, and 9 out of 10 dentists recommend every single toothpaste on the market.
That is so
that's
true.
Good.
That's good. That's good.
Oh, man. I found it really interesting in the sermon, the connection you made, and that you already chatted about a little bit about that connection between Barabbas and Jesus. Two people with the same name. And something that's like hit me was when you said that we vilify Barabbas. I was like, that's true. Whenever I've thought of that story, I've thought of him as a villain, a murderer, somebody who we would never want free. And you totally opened my eyes that that's not what's going on here.
And thanks for picking that up. And again, just the insight wasn't mine. It was in terms of reading commentaries and some reading that I've been doing recently. That sort of insight came.
Just to give a little revealing, most of what we preach is not original.
Is not original, And I just saw this line and I saw this person develop it and I went, it's almost like the marketing thing when you go like, that makes a whole lot of sense out of that particular passage. And especially when the person then linked it to the fact that, and hanging on the cross next to Jesus were two of, not necessarily Barabbas's sort of part of his gang or group, but people with the same kind of motive and same agenda, So why do we vilify? And I think why has he been pointed out as a thief? Part of it is the word can be translated in a number of different ways. So it can be translated thief or bandit, but also insurrectionist. So it helps us that Mark and the other Gospels actually point out to us that in the insurrection, so they're telling you how to interpret the word. So that's really, really helpful. And I think that just the whole fact that, in a sense, he was this insurrectionist. He was, together with the others, they are working for, or they believe that they really are trying to bring God's kingdom in. And there's a similarity in terms of broader objective with what Jesus is trying to do. And I think that makes people very, very uncomfortable. So Jesus would have been sympathetic with the cause, but definitely not the message. And I think that really just situates the gospel message again in everyday real life, in real politics. It doesn't allow us to spiritualize that message. So it's easy, I think, to vilify Barabbas, and it's easy to vilify him as a thief, as a bad person, because we can say, well, it's this beautiful contrast of what grace is, but then we don't have to see ourselves in Barabbas. Because most of us don't think of ourselves as murderers or somebody's going to go out and rob a bank. But as you know, Jesus reminded us that, evil ultimately comes from the heart. And we can harbor murderous and harmful thoughts to other people in our hearts. And as far as he's concerned, you've then already committed that murder in your heart. And it's already a sin, even though you haven't acted on it. So maybe it's easier to vilify Barabbas in that way and not deal with just the real world political ramifications of what was going on there as well.
For me, I kind of connected it maybe on that marketing theme. The images I have in my head of him, of Barabbas, come from movies, Jesus movies. And every time you see him, he looks like a villain.
He looks like a raving lunatic when you see him sometimes. I've seen ones foaming at the mouth.
And, that's one of those things that sometimes when you get influenced by something, you're not always aware of it. And I go, every time I pictured this character, I followed the format I saw on video.
You were primed.
And I was primed to see it this way. And, I love movies, and I think a lot of the movies that we have that show Jesus' story are good and powerful.
Good, powerful, yeah.
And especially at their time, maybe not always current. But we got to be careful with that, because we're not people of the movie, we're people of the book.
People of the book, exactly. I mean, my famous one that I like to laugh about is the great movie, The Ten Commandments, with Charlton Heston, and he's this young, strapping-looking guy. We were told that Moses was, he was clearly pretty fit, but he was 80 years old at the time, so he wasn't looking like this young, strapping guy in his 30s, this like super hunk.
He aged very well.
He clearly aged very well.
Oh, dear. We have talked about insurrection, violence, hatred. What Anabaptists have typically preached is a way of peace. But that way of peace has often been associated with being passive. And that's not a great way to approach things. And especially when we talk about how our faith needs to impact this world, the last thing we want to be is passive. How do we change this view to make Anabaptism an idea of a peace path through these violent and difficult subjects actually be attractive and feel like it makes a difference?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. And I know when you really get into the nuts and bolts of this debate, it's easy to give sort of trite answers. So one of the things I don't ever want to accuse, our Anabaptist forebears, those who literally had to flee in order to protect their lives and protect their families rather than respond in violence. So there was a time when withdrawal was probably the best and the only option that people have in terms of their commitment to non-violence. But I think today in particular, as I think society has evolved, and particularly as ideas of democracy have taken root around the world, we see that there's the opportunity for non-violent resistance, non-violent protest, and that is very, very, very powerful. Again, coming back to Martin Luther King, he advocated it, and he's probably, in terms of the civil rights, another leader who put that really, really in the forefront, particularly in North America. But Gandhi did the same thing over in India, and was very, very powerful. It was part of bringing the empire down back then. So it is a very, very powerful way of resisting, opposing, but just believing that we're not going to use violent means. But it doesn't mean you don't protest. It doesn't mean you don't advocate. Coming from South Africa, and my own experience of that was in the 80s, the international community sort of finally coalesced. And the two big, at that point in time, countries that were holding out were the UK and America. And South Africa did a lot of trade with those two countries. And when they finally joined in the international sanctions and boycotts, that very quickly began to cripple the apartheid regime. And within a decade, many people believe that that is fundamentally what led the regime to realize we can't continue down this path. We are basically going to bankrupt ourselves, and it's game over anyway. So we have to seek an alternative. And I'd like to give due to F.W. de Klerk, who was the president at the time, that he saw that, and even though it was against what then his own party and probably most white South Africans would have wanted, he started the path of freeing Mandela, realizing that in so doing, it was the end of white rule. But there again, a non-violent form of action actually had an outcome that was positive in the long run.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's one thing to remember, that we're involved in the long run here, and short-term gain doesn't pay off.
Yeah.
And you made that very clear on Sunday, that we need to be a people that look at the long term. And I think we can apply that. I mean, there's big issues that are national or globally large, but we have them in our own church. And we need to apply these same principles of we're going to take the long road that's going to work towards us actually building unity and hopefully something that we can all be a part of.
And I just don't have the actual source of the quote, but in terms of preparing for the sermon, in one of the books that I was reading, and it was a bit of a historical survey, and that's actually one of the points that they made, that in the long run, peace, reconciliation, non-violent protest is actually far more effective and far more long-lasting than war and violence. War and violence can often produce a quick result, but can often result in something which begins to mirror almost the very thing that it set out to fight against. Whereas something which is much more long-lasting is the way of peace and reconciliation. It's a much more effective, if I can use that word, weapon in the long run than violence and war.
Yeah, absolutely. We're entering into the Easter season.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get ourselves into the Easter mindset. It's a little difficult because this year has been so different and our rhythms are just off. But one question I kind of want us to engage with is, how do we look at Easter as not just about personal salvation, as important as that is, but the bigger question about Jesus bringing the kingdom and his rule to this world. And why do you think we so often forget that piece, that bringing the kingdom here?
Yeah, we forget that piece of the gospel message of what Easter was bringing in. I think part of that, not just part of it, I think a very big part of that is probably a remnant of Greek thinking that still exists. And that is, we have turned the spiritual into something which is personal and private, and it's the interior life. And we've created this dichotomy between that which is spiritual, interior, versus that which is material and physical in the world, and kind of set that apart. And the church has, we know that. The church has sort of buyed into that dualistic way of thinking. The beauty of the gospel message is that, Christ came into this world, embodied, infleshed, walked on this earth, experienced what we experienced, took on our form, died as one of us, and is raised to new life, then not as spirit, but as a human being. So I think that's a very, very important lesson for us to keep in mind through this Easter, that the message of the gospel is a message for this world.
Yeah. For
our lives in this world. It's not a message of Christ coming in order to save us so that we can escape this world. And the message of the kingdom coming in is that now, as the people of God, we don't force that kingdom of others, but we should live in such a way that we, and I think as N.T. Wright likes to put it, we are signposts to the reality of that kingdom already being birthed through the church, in Christ.
I think that connection to the kind of the Greek side of things, I would add the connection to Augustine, who's writing at the
father of the interior life.
And he's writing at the end of the fall of the Roman Empire, which people kind of thought was God's kingdom, right? And you see this kingdom collapsing around. You're like, is God real then?
Is God real? Is God still in charge? Yeah. All things falling apart.
Because everything's falling apart. And I think Augustine correctly says, no, that's not the case. But over time, we've definitely moved more and more towards this idea that, if things in the real world change, then we can't really participate in them. And that's not a good attitude.
That's not a good attitude, so we're still dealing with lots of the remnants of that Hellenistic way of thinking.
And these major events, for me, what always captures my imagination looking back is you think, wow, these are people that saw their civilization fall apart before them. A civilization they thought would never end. And it's gone. It lost everything and its power. And then the church continued after and filled the gap. But when you're trying to get into the imagination of somebody else, you have to think about how everywhere they look, medieval people see these remnants of this great civilization
that has literally crumbled.
It's literally crumbled, and you could not reproduce their technology. It's the stuff that we use for writing books, or apocalyptic movies, right? It's that kind of mentality. But that's not where we're at. So I think we need to be a little...
We need to be a little bit, again, and not sort of wanting to make it too philosophical, but even behind that whole change thing was the view that change was a bad thing. You wanted order, you wanted stability. So the view that history was this changing thing was very, very frightening to people. And so that view just gave you a sense of order. And if anything was changing, it therefore meant that it was bad. And I've often just thought about, I don't know, it's easy to look back and say, how did they get that wrong? Maybe they were living within the context of their day. But just the fact that God himself embraced change. God changed his form from his divine form to a human form. Talk about change. That is a radical change. And then doesn't do it just to achieve a result and then say, okay, I'm done with that and go back into the form. Chooses to stay in this form So talk about change. And I think that gives us this view that with God, history and time is moving towards a purpose. And we can embrace that, and change is part of that. So change isn't a byproduct of the fact that things are not working the way they should. I think change is built into the dynamism of God's creation. He created it good, but he expected it to be improved, us to work with him.
Yeah, so absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us. Before you sign off of the video, remember to hit the like button, and we're going to give you a couple questions here, and if you could throw your answer in the comments, that'd be great. The first question is, what is a good example of marketing that you've seen?
And I'd love to see that.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
And we'll give them a reward. The second question is, what person in the Bible do you think has been vilified that maybe we need to rethink? So, there's different people that we've looked at as good, or there's different people that maybe we've looked at as bad, and maybe there's some rethinking we need to do.
Well, Nick, I wasn't anticipating that question, but it's a pretty good one. So very keen to hear what people have to say. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on the comments. Thanks for watching our little podcast, and we are excited to see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.